for the lecture, 3 Lives, 1 Legacy, commemorating the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz liberation, presented by Robin LaCorte. This presentation will profile 3 Holocaust survivors that created new lives here in Arizona. These women survived and created new lives that continue to inspire, and this anniversary provides us a chance to share their stories of strength and resilience. Our presenter, Robin LaCorte, holds a bachelor's degree in education and a master's degree in World War II studies, completed in partnership with the National World War II Museum. She currently serves as the Holocaust Education Program Coordinator at the Martin Springer Institute at Northern Arizona University, where she works closely with educators across Arizona to develop impactful Holocaust and Genocide education programs. In addition, Robin is a member of the Phoenix Holocaust Association Board of Directors, the Arizona Department of Education Task Force on Holocaust and Genocide Education, and the Arizona Jewish Historical Society Education Committee. Robin's passion for studying World War II is deeply personal. As the daughter and granddaughter of 3 World War II veterans and 1 Rosie the Riveter, she grew up hearing stories of service, sacrifice, and resilience. And you will hear those words a lot: resistance and resilience and strength. This rich personal history, combined with her lifelong commitment to preserving the memory of the past, drives her work to ensure that stories of courage, resistance, and survival continue to inspire future generations.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Can everyone hear me okay? If I get too loud, please let me know that too. As I say to my family all the time, I have a big family, 4 children, and an Italian husband. And we tend to do a lot of this, and so in our family we call it elevating and detonating when we all start talking at once, because it just gives, oh, the LaCortes are here, it's very loud, we can tell they're coming in. I would like to say thank you again for coming today. I really do appreciate the grace of your time. It's a Sunday afternoon, you could be anywhere, you could be curled up with a good book. Instead, you're here with me, and I do really appreciate that. This hour is going to go really quickly. It was very difficult for me to sort of choose just one subject. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Auschwitz, about the history of it, about how it came to be, but I'm going to not go into a lot of detail, and I'll tell you why. Everybody has the internet, and you can look that up very quickly. Facts and figures don't tell you the story. They tell you a piece of it. But what they don't tell you about is the human condition that goes along with it. And I think it's much more impactful, much more meaningful when we hear about individuals and stories, again, of survival, of resilience, of resistance, of inward strength that for some people at the tender ages they were, it's hard to fathom how they brought that forward and into their own sort of self-preservation. The thing when I've worked with Holocaust survivors that I hear time and again is, I was so lucky. I was just so lucky. And that's probably true to some degree. There is an element of luck in everything, but there was also a tenacity that ran through people. There was a will to survive. As we know, many, too many to even mention, too many to count, did not make it, did not survive. Not of their own choice, certainly. So anyone who went through this experience came out on the other side and continued to then share that information. And 3 of the women that we're going to talk about today, the 3 women, are incredible examples of that tenacity, that ability to take the worst that life could give them and turn it into something meaningful and demonstrate that life is long and you keep going. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'll tell you more as we go along. We do have a special guest that I'm going to bring up towards the end. I'll hold you on that one until we get there. As we start, as I said, over 1.1 million. It's almost hard to fathom what that number could look like. And projects have tried to embody that, and it's impossible, and it's almost sometimes disrespectful because it is such a large number. Men, women, and children murdered for no reason other than because they disagreed or they didn't fit a standard that was set by somebody who chose that was the ultimate standard that they should aspire to or should be like. There were many other reasons, of course. The need for land, the want of land. But these were all intrinsic desires that had nothing to do with people who were just living their lives, loving their families, creating and playing music and all the things that we all do. They were just innocent people. Auschwitz is both a symbol of human cruelty, which we know, and of resilience. Anyone who came through that system and survived and went on, I can't think of anyone who had more resilience. Location, German-occupied Poland. There were actually 3 camps, including a killing center. When I talk with students, I talk about concentration camps and the different types of camps there were. It wasn't just killing camps, there were transit camps. There were POW camps. There were forced labor camps. They all had a function. They all had a reason to exist in this insanity that was. January 27th, 1945, Liberation Day. Soviet soldiers came in, people were freed, and then you have that letter, that 4-letter word, free. What does that exactly mean? Free to do what? Free to go where? Families were wiped out, villages were wiped out. There were no homes. When we get to Doris Springer Martin, I will explain to you when they went back in subsequent years, all evidence that their community had existed had ceased to exist. You had to look to see maybe where a Star of David was embedded in a fence post. But everything had vanished, was covered over. So Elie Wiesel tells us, for the dead and the living, we must bear witness. And that is exactly what we are doing today. We're bearing witness. So before we go any further, the Holocaust was a systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million European Jews by the Nazi German regime and its allies and collaborators. The Holocaust was an evolving process that took place throughout Europe between 1933 and 1945. I won't read through, you can see that yourselves, but one of the points that I'd like to make is that Americans think that World War II, for us, it was 1941 to 1945. Pearl Harbor, we know what pulled us into it. The rise of Adolf Hitler started long before even 1933. Mein Kampf was written in 1925 while he was actually in prison. He had one of his cronies who edited it as it went along. By the time that he was coming into power in 1933, many of the pogroms had to take hold. So, for instance, anybody who politically disagreed, socialists, people who didn't necessarily believe or love in the same way as what he deemed appropriate. They were targeted. They were often immediately removed into a camp system. Much different than what our camp system became, but at the same time, it was a place to take people and put them, and freedoms were eliminated. It's really important that we say that up front, that this is what happened. Systematic is a key word there. Systematic. It didn't happen by chance. It didn't happen by accident. It was a system. And it happened every day, day after day. People will say, how could this have happened? Well, it happened one day at a time. literally, one day at a time. And we have to be careful in our own communities as we look around and we see things happen. We may see something scrawled on a fence post, or somebody uses a trope that they don't really understand and think is humorous. That's how it continues, by not stepping forward and saying, you know what, that's not okay. Let me explain to you why that's not okay. You have to stop it in its tracks. So how does it happen? It happens one day at a time. It happens one action at a time. So it goes through historical accuracy. These are more reasons why it is so important that we continue to have these conversations, that I'm here today doing this. One of the biggest ones for me as an educator is, of course, educational responsibility. Setting context, making sure that everybody knows exactly why and what we're talking about. Combating Holocaust denial and distortion. It still happens. If we don't make the statement, distortion is a possibility. It happens. Connecting the past to the present. I talk to high school students a lot. 80 years ago, why is this important to me? Well, you could have been a child back then. Let's look at some things that are happening in the world today. How could this happen again if we're not watching, if we're not talking about it, if we're not representing ourselves in the best way? Finally, of course, honoring the victims and survivors. 6 million Jews, 5 million in other categories that were deemed undesirable. Slave labor, 14 million. Russian civilians, even during the war, we know that 5 million, just civilians living in their villages, murdered. So where was this? Okay, and I'll go through this very quickly. The extermination camps, we know today that there were actually over 44,000, which is just a huge number to wrap your head around. 44,000 camps that have been documented. Research is continuing. When I first heard that number, I thought, come on, that can't be real. I've heard of Treblinka. I've actually been to Treblinka. Sobibor, Majdanek, Belzec, Kelmo, Auschwitz, what we're talking about today. What other ones are we talking about? Well, again, we go back to the system and how everything had its purpose and its structure. 44,000. I have 4 volumes of a book that was published by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. They're into their 5th now. It's being written, it's being researched as we speak. You can see where Auschwitz was located. And as you move around, everything was connected by trains, we know that. They're spaced out enough, too, that wherever you were vulnerable. These all existed. Women in Auschwitz, and I'm going to transition into women specifically because we are talking about women today. Total number of female prisoners, female camp were in prison, 131,000 prisoners. And you can see the numbers as the years went by. Lots of women. And then we break it down by grouping. Of course, in the blue, the largest group, 63% of Jews deported from different countries, 82,000 people. Polish, 31,000, Roma, 11,000, and other nations, approximately 7,000. The largest number, again, being our Jewish population. So that brings us to the ladies that we're going to speak about today. I'm guessing that most of you have heard of these ladies. If you haven't, you won't forget them. We have Gerta Weissman Klein over here. Doris Martin, born in 1947, founder, along with her husband Ralph Martin, of the Martin Springer Institute, where I am employed. And then on the end, we have Esther Basch. This was a later photo. You can see there is a hate symbol, 1959. This was in a New York subway. But I think she just looks so beautiful here in her heels and her and her matching handbag that I couldn't resist putting that one in. So first I want to talk a little bit about Gerta. I'm going to talk less about her because she is so well known. But the first thing I want to do is play a short video for you. And this is Gerta, part of one of her oral histories, and she's talking about the last birthday present that she received from her mother and father. So bear with me just one moment.
My mother decided I'm going to the and I just did a wonderful thing.
So sorry.
It's a big birthday, my 65th. And a friend of mine who now lives in Detroit, my husband and children gave me a party. She came to that party, and she was in Arizona now, and she was at a birthday party. The birthday party was rather grand because my mother had some oatmeal, and she had made some wonderful cookies, which we all swore were absolutely tasted like nuts. And I had a birthday party, which was crowned by an incredible thing. I got an orange. I always loved oranges. Only later did I find out that my mother had gone out of the ghetto, sold a diamond and pearl ring to get me an orange. That was the last birthday gift to my parents.
Apologize for that squawk. So Gerta spent the majority of her life, all of her life really, educating others about her experience. Can you all hear me still okay? Her tie to Auschwitz, she was not actually in Auschwitz. However, her mother, her father, and her younger brother all were taken to Auschwitz and were murdered there. So once they were taken, that was the last time she saw them. Gerta went on, and she had some levels of fame. She wrote a book about her experience. Sorry. There we go. There's always going to be one mistake. She wrote a book. She won an Oscar for the documentary here called One Survivor Remembers. And in 2011, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So one woman, one life. She was quite extraordinary. I have a little personal aside that I'll tell you about, and I'm going to try not to get too far gone. This is going back almost 40 years now, and it was right after I had had our first son, and we got invited to a Super Bowl party. I know this sounds like a random story. Hang on with me. So we get invited to go to a Super Bowl party, and I'm thinking, I do not want to take my infant son to this loud, boisterous environment, right? But I do believe in just showing up, because you never know who you're going to meet, you never know where you're going to meet different people that somehow will affect your life. So we go to this birthday party, or Super Bowl party. I walk in, and have my son, and I see this beautiful woman with this full head of black hair sitting quietly on a couch. Something pulled me towards her, and she had a very strong accent, and she immediately came forward and said, may I hold your baby? I said, of course. I was happy to have some help there. And we chatted for a few moments, and the day went by, and I met this lovely lady, went home. Years and years later, I am at the Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C., in Washington, D.C., the first time. I finished my tour, I'm at the very end of the museum, and there's a film, and it's already started, so I think, okay, I'll have a seat and I'll catch the end of it and start it all over again. And I see this person with this lovely black hair, and she's talking about the story, and it just didn't ring in that moment. And so I kept thinking, how do I know her? How do I know her? How do I know her? And then it would cut away to this gentleman, very eloquent gentleman, talking about a woman that he met when he, as a liberator, went into a camp. She had white hair, she weighed 68 pounds, but there was something about her. And they keep going back and forth between these two stories. And all of a sudden, I realized, it's Gerta. It's who I had sat on the couch with, who had held my son. And it was just this moment of grace that it was also sort of like an electric shock. I was like, oh my goodness, that's Gerta. And it was Kurt, and he was talking about the beginning of this lovely, lifelong love story that they had together. Turns out, the house that we went to was his daughter and son-in-laws, or their daughter and son-in-laws. So you never know who you're going to meet in this life. I'm going to grab a quick drink of water. Again, I could talk about Gerta for an hour, but again, because we don't have all day, we're going to move on to Doris Martin. So Doris was a powerhouse. She was a little woman about this big, but she had a way of capturing your attention. She's the founder, again, of our institute. She and her husband, Ralph Martin, founded it in 2000. Doris didn't talk about her story for a lot of years. She had 3 siblings and her mother and father. They lived in a very small town called Benjamin, Poland. 25,000 people who were Jewish, 25,000 who were Catholic. Coexisted, peaceful, sort of an idyllic childhood, really. Her family had the shoe store in town, and the family lived in the apartment above the shoe store. September 1, 1939, Nazi Germany invades Poland. September 4, they are in her small town of Benjamin. Life changes, never to be corrected again. Having 4 members of a family survive was almost impossible. It was almost unheard of. And yet it was her mother's one wish that once again, or 5 children, that they all be reunited, okay? They were scattered far and wide over the course of the Holocaust, each having a very, very different experience. I could again tell you many, but there's one in particular that I like to share, and that is they had to go and sit in a soccer field in this town. They had their first big roundup after the Germans came in and occupied. 3 days they sat, all of them. It was an order. And by now they had already burnt the synagogue down, and there were 200 people that were in that synagogue when it happened. And it wasn't about extermination at that point, it was about power. It was about saying, we are now in control. Get on board, or we're going to have a problem. You're going to have a problem. And so the first big roundup, they all have to go to this soccer field. They are out there 3 days, 3 nights, no food, no water, no things to take care of, you know, all the things that are human about us. And they wait, and they wait. And people are selected, people are moved on, people are deported, people are sent towards the trains. Remarkably, no one in her family on that first roundup was selected. And so as they were going back to their home, her father said to the entire family, we should kiss every step that we are all still together. And so later in life, Doris decided that that would be a great title for her book, Kiss Every Step. And so in her book, which is self-published, she talks about each of the family members and their experience. One of the experiences for Doris was that her, the soldiers came to collect her. She was going to be deported, sent to a forced labor camp. She hid in, of all things, their sort of pot-belly oven stove. They had no fuel, it wasn't going or anything like that. She actually got into it because she was so tiny, and they put a flower pot on top of the stove to disguise her. No Doris, though she didn't get arrested. Unfortunately, her mother did. So they took her mother, arrested her, and held her. They gave her time to give herself up. They knew that she was hiding, of course. Doris couldn't stand the idea that her mother was now being held on her behalf. So of course she turned herself in and her mother was released. Dora was originally sent to Auschwitz, and as you see from her statement here, she knew that you had to connect with people in order to survive. You couldn't just be out there on your own. You had to connect, you had to support one another, however that looked. And that was one of the phrases that she put in the book. This is actually from an exhibit that I take around to high schools throughout Arizona. I was telling these guys earlier, I was in Bullhead City on Tuesday, Wednesday, came home Thursday. Wednesday and Thursday, I saw 478 high school students come through the exhibit and learn the story of not just Doris, but of other young people from Benjamin, who all were between the ages of 13 and 17, and some survived, some did not. But it takes the story of this small town, just this one little town, and these 8 people, and students are able to see through their eyes that they're not so different. There's one person in the exhibit who they call her the Anne Frank of Poland. Her name is Rutka Laskie, and she wrote a notebook. She entrusted it to her dear friend, who promptly then hid it for the next 60 years. Rutka did not survive. Her notebook did. And so now we have a copy of that, but she didn't want to release it because in the notebook, it talks about having feelings. Like, I really think this boy is cute. Of course, the next day she was like, I can't stand him. I never want to speak to him again. But again, it was so normal. And that's the high school students just respond to that. They get it. They really do. They can identify with Rutka even all these years later. So again, you know, her family was sent far and wide as they tried to survive. Doris, again, her last camp was in Ludwigsdorf as a slave laborer. As you can see here, there's only one person who was unable to participate in the writing of her book, and it was just because it was still too painful for him. He chose not to be a part of that. Otherwise, everyone did participate, and so we know a lot about Doris. The other thing about Doris that's really interesting is that she didn't talk about her story, not until the 90s. She saw Schindler's List, she got some encouragement, she started to talk to classes. And once she started, she didn't stop, literally did not stop. We have 3 volumes of notebooks with thank you letters from students that are in our archives at Martin Springer about how they were touched by her story, how hearing her quiet voice, just something that they would never forget. I would love to know where some of those people are today, if they ever met her and wrote one of those letters, and just to hear now, these many years later, how it affected them going forward. So Doris talked until she couldn't, until she was getting elderly and it became too difficult. And then NAU did this really cool thing. They created this exhibit I was telling you about. So a bunch of students, about 7 NAU students, not necessarily history students, came together and they, with photographs, created this incredible exhibit, 2013. We are now in 2025. We are still doing research. We've got another project that's in the works right now with honor students from NAU. And they're taking photographs where there's larger amounts of people and they're analyzing it. Who are these people? How do we find them? And so it's this whole investigative detective work, and they are so involved in finding out more about Doris, about the people who lived in Benjamin, and what happened to them ultimately. Again, Doris's book is here. She has a large interview on the USC Shoah Foundation. It's a 4-hour interview. If you are interested, I put it up here because trying to find her interview was like looking for a needle in a haystack. I was looking for Dora, which was what she went by as a child. Springer, which was her Polish name, she is listed as Doris Martin. And so I couldn't find it for the longest time. And so you have to set up an account in order to view it. But I'm telling you, it is worth viewing. She's very poignant. She does share her emotions quite openly. But you won't forget her after you meet her through her oral history. So again, these oral histories are just priceless. And again, this is the exhibit that I was talking about. This is actually just one wing of it. There are 4 wings, and it tracks the entire thing from 1933 through 1989. And one of the things we've just found out is that in Benjamin, there are 2 archaeologists who are going back, and they are actually uncovering some of those painted over buildings, and they're finding beautiful Hebrew writings and pictures and mezuzah casings and prayer rooms that were bricked up. They're uncovering all kinds of history there. So history is a mystery, is how I like to phrase it. We're never done with it. There's always one more thing to learn. There's always a little another nuance to engage. And so it's just an honor and a pleasure to take this to students and to let them understand a little bit more about what happened. This was one of the openings, and this is Doris giving a warm hug to one of the students who was involved with the project. And now we come to our Prescott resident, and I would like, if I could, to invite her granddaughter on stage. Come on up. Well, we're going to, so Esther is actually at a speaking event today. She's in Yuma, giving testimony to yet another group. How many was she doing this week?
I think it.
Are you on?
Should be on.
I think it was seven speaking engagements in 5 days
And
in Yuma.
how old is Esther?
96.
Yeah. Just so you know, I mean, indomitable spirit. So I just think this is such a beautiful, beautiful photograph of her. She was known, or is known, as the Honey Girl of Auschwitz, and we'll talk more about that. Can you tell us who this is?
This is my grandpa, Joe. Joseph Basch. This was on their wedding day. They were in a displaced persons camp. And yeah, she tells the story of how the other people that were staying there, they saved their rations of cigarettes to buy her a white piece of material for a white blouse for her wedding day. And I think they had, I think they used an army jacket to cut and make a skirt for her. But she was 17. I think she was still 17 there. And my grandpa was 23. He had taken 60 orphans on this journey, you know, after the war was over, to find them placement, to leave them in displaced persons camps and stuff like that, or, you know, if they could find family members that had survived. And it's kind of just a family joke that he couldn't find anybody to take my grandma, so he married her.
I was hoping you would say that. Such a handsome man, and I mean, they found love. They found love. So I didn't tell your name, did I? Alana.
My name is Alana.
Oh, it just occurred to me, I didn't say your name. And so just to, and some of you might be aware of this, but as many of our survivors pass literally into history, something that is happening is there are organizations that are known as 2G and now 3G that are becoming more and more active. And the 2G stands for second generation. This would be the child, of course, of the Holocaust survivor. And now we are also having organizations of 3Gs who are going back and presenting their grandparents' stories and keeping those stories alive. And the thing that I find very, very fascinating is especially when you get to see both a 2G and a 3G and the survivor, the stories and the dynamics between the individuals are so unique. You know, just like we have a different relationship with our children and they to us, but the grandchildren, they're pretty special. So sometimes they get more information than even the child might have. So I have a series of questions that I wanted to kind of ask Ilana and see what your thoughts were. So I know I'm awkward over here, but if your grandmother could share one central message with the world, what do you think it would be?
I know exactly what it is. I've heard her say it hundreds and hundreds of times. And it's not hers, it's her parents' message that she has held on to. And when she shares her story, she says that this is all she has of her parents. Like, she doesn't have a photo, she has nothing. She has absolutely nothing of her parents except what they taught her. And as simple as it sounds, it still blows my mind every day. She says that her parents taught her to love God, to be kind to everyone, no matter, race or where they come from, what they look like, if they have money, no money, to love everyone. What does she say? To love God, to be kind to each other, to forgive. Oh, and she says that her mother always told her that to be good, and this is how she says it, to be good, and if you can't be good, don't do anything bad. And to live and to love. That's how she has just done it, and it's through her faith. That's always what blew my mind about her is her absolute unwavering faith.
Yeah. I rewatched this morning. She recently sat down for a podcast with a podcaster here in town. Mm-hmm. So I went through that again this morning. I have seen Esther. I've gone to see her speak several times. I had the great grace of speaking with your mom and with your grandmother last Sunday night, and everybody calls her Mom. She just goes by Mom, and she's truly one of the most gentle people that I think I've ever met, but there is a steely strength in her that is undeniable. It's just there.
She's the smallest big person you'll ever meet.
She's incredible. She's just incredible. Just to back up a little bit, I'm going to tell and I'm watching our time here. She was born in Czechoslovakia, but then it became Hungary, correct?
Correct.
And then, I don't know, did it go back to being Czechoslovakia?
Yes.
And does it remain that today, or is it now Hungary again? These borders kind of did this.
I'm actually not sure what it is today,
yeah.
But
Slovakia.
It's Slovakia now, thank you.
Czech lands.
Say again?
There's the Czech lands, which is the northern part of
Czech Republic.
Slovakia.
And even when I was there, I was in Czech about maybe 6 years ago, and it was just after they had changed a name, and so we were warned, do not refer to, this is no longer the Czech Republic, it is now Czechoslovakia again, so they were like, be careful. So can you just tell a little bit of your grandmother's story of how she became the honey girl? It's a long story. The part about Mengele is especially poignant, and then her liberation, of course.
You want me to tell that part as well? Okay.
You tell what you want, and I'll fill in.
So, I mean, when she speaks about Auschwitz, she is very specific about how they used to have to stand outside for hours and hours and hours to be counted twice a day. That was like the biggest, well, let me rephrase, not the biggest form of torture, but one of the ones that she really remembers. She said it didn't matter if it was, snowing or hailing or thunder and lightning and raining, that you just had to stand in line for hours until everybody was counted. And of course, if people were missing, they had to be found, and usually they were by the electric fences. A lot of people chose to stop their own suffering on a daily basis, and so there was a lot of looking for people. But she said one day she was standing in line and she had made friends with these 4 sisters from her hometown, and the youngest one became like her best friend there. And Dr. Mangala would come around, and she always speaks specifically about his silver cane. And she said he would just walk around and, point people out of the line, and they would have to move forward and go with him. And she said one day she was standing in line, and he approached her line, and she thought he pointed to her. And so she stepped out of the line. And he took his cane and he pushed it into, like, she describes it as very, very hard, pushed it into her belly button and pushed her back into the line and pointed at her best friend and said, and that was the last time she saw her friend. And then following that, she said that later that day, one of the very mean capos came into the bunker and said, did anybody lose a family member today? Was anybody's family member taken? And the sisters raised their hand and said, yes, our little sister was taken. And, she pointed to the smoking chimney and said, that's where your sister is. And then my grandma follows that by saying that she still has guilty feelings about being alive and her best friend not. She feels that, or she always in her mind thought that it was supposed to be her, or she thought it was supposed to be her. An insane type of survivor's guilt. But when it comes to the honey girl part, and this was, my grandmother was not liberated from Auschwitz. She was liberated from a labor camp, and I believe it was called Falleslegen. I know I can't pronounce it right, but I believe that was the camp that she was liberated from. And when the American soldiers came and they opened my grandma describes it, they shut open the gate and said, you are free. But obviously, like you were saying, what is free? Where are they supposed to go? They're skeletons. And the soldiers, I think, stayed from April until September, nursing them back to health and getting them well. But they basically said, you go into town, take whatever you'd like, whatever you want, go into town and take. And my grandma says that she really didn't want anything. All she was thinking about was going home and finding her family. But she went into town, and every time she tells the story, it's like the jar of honey gets bigger and bigger. But she says, and I found this big jar of honey. It's like anybody who fishes, and they tell the story about the biggest fish they caught. It gets bigger and bigger every time they tell the story. So apparently the jar of honey, was like this big. And she says by the time she got back to the camp, she had licked it all up with her fingers and then got deathly ill. She was a skeleton. And she ended up in the infirmary for about a month because of that. I can fast forward until my daughter was 2. Now it's about 18 years ago. It was 4th of July. We took my daughter. I'll try to speed through this, but we took my daughter to see the 4th of July fireworks, and it appeared as though my little 2-year-old had gotten emotional in the stroller, with the fireworks and the music. And me and my mom called my grandma the next day, and we were telling her, and she says, did I ever tell you about my first 4th of July? It was when the American soldiers were there with us, and they were celebrating, and with the language barrier, they really didn't know what they were celebrating, but she said she remembered feeling extremely, like she could feel the feeling behind the celebration of freedom, And that day she said to my mom, I don't know if I ever said this out loud, but man, if I could ever meet one of the soldiers that liberated my camp, that would be just amazing to me. So of course my mom does whatever she could to find one of these liberators, and make a long story short, she found one. His name was Max Lieber, and he lived in New Mexico. He was 89 at the time, and when he found out that there was a survivor in Phoenix, I think he got in his car the next day no, it wasn't the next day. We planned it because my brother came out from New York and all that stuff, but That meeting was one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed in my life. It died. Oh no.
It's okay if it does. I have a pretty big voice. And it was incredible because I don't know who was more emotional, you know, my grandmother or Max, and this turned into a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful friendship. And my parents would take my grandma to New Mexico, and they would go to his house and socialize and have neighbors over. And one day they had people around, and out of nowhere, Max looked at her and said, "Esther, do you like honey?" She said, "Not anymore." He says, "I know why. I know why. You're the honey girl. You're the honey girl." I guess the soldiers had, you know, called her the honey girl, and he remembered.
Yeah. And now there is a, okay, don't tell anybody.
There was supposed to be an actual documentary, and I'm sorry to say that, you know, people went into it out of the kindness of their heart, and weird things happen when money gets involved, unfortunately. But yeah, we ended up utilizing the fundraising in another way, and there is a hologram of my grandma that is almost done. And I don't know if you know what that means. Like, that's, I mean, there will be installations. There will be several installations in different places, but it will also be forever available on the internet. It is basically, my grandmother sat down for days in a row and answered hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions. And basically what it is that any student, anywhere, any grade,
Right.
any century from now can pull up my grandmother and hear a bit of her story and ask her anything, and she will be able to answer.
It's pretty incredible. It's USC Sharlot Foundation has done these. We have one in Phoenix right now with Oscar Knobloch, who I got to meet Oscar many years ago, and he was quite a character, and he made sure to ask me if I was going to be at his 100th birthday party, and I said, of course I would be honored. He said, great, we're going to have dancing girls. I said, it's on the calendar already. So he has one,
Yeah.
and it's
I've seen it.
it's amazing.
It is amazing. It's wild. And like my mom says, you know, my grandma will literally be here until the dinosaurs come back. You know?
Which is, you know, it's just it's a beautiful thing to be able to, I've interacted with Oscars a little bit, and you know, you kind of have to get your sea legs, if you will, around asking the questions, but once you do, you're like, oh, I want to do this. I want another question. I want another. You know, you kind of have to limit your time to it because there's other people who want to interact too, but it's like you're having a conversation.
I told her my first question is going to be, who's your favorite grandchild?
There you go. I love it. Perfect. That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm trying to think of what else. Well, let's go to the next question. It'll probably trigger something. Okay, so this one's got two. How has, and this is more about you, how has your grandmother's story shaped your understanding of resilience, kindness, and hope? And how did that influence your perspective on life and the challenges you have faced? Those are big questions.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
So I have no shame or embarrassment in saying that most of my life was spent in active addiction. I've been clean for over 6 years now, but when I did get clean, or when I was in jail, considering that something had to change, or that everything had to change, you know, it's just the scariest thought. Can't imagine, you know, what anything is going to look like. And I don't know, that space that I had to clear up my mind a little bit, things started really rushing in, and I just knew that my grandma was the person that I needed to talk to, because I did not have faith in anything. And and I needed to know about hers. I needed to know how, that got her through everything that she had gone through. And she had, I told her that, and she grabbed my hand and she said, honey, she says, I know God will help you. I know, he got me through what I got through, and he loves you, and you're beautiful, and it's gonna be okay. And that was just the beginning of my believing her, and I've asked her countless times, was there one moment while you were being beaten, while you were being tortured, while you were being starved, was there one moment where you said, why is this happening to me? Why? And she said no. She said no. She said, I just always knew it was something that I was just going through and that it was going to be okay. So when that woman looks you in the eye and tells you that, you have no choice but to believe it,
Yeah.
So hope, yes. Resilience, there I am,
Case in point, huh?
Kindness is everything. The resilience part, though, this is really important. I think that, and of course I'm not comparing my experiences to my grandmother's, but as humans, we go through life. I mean, I just simply call it life. I don't call it good, bad, traumatic, dark, happy, it's life, and it's all of it. But for people who go through bigger dark times than others, it goes in one of two directions. And I think I know a big part of what makes that difference, whether you fall into the victim, negative, hate, resentment, whether you fall into that or you move towards the resilience and the hope and the spreading a positive message, and being grateful for all of the other things. I look at my grandma and grandpa. My grandpa did not come out this beam of light like my grandma is, and I think it has to do with their upbringings. She was an only child, loved, sheltered, just taught to be good, to be kind.
Something that was within her
something
already.
that was within her, something that she was shown.
Yeah.
My grandpa, unfortunately, did not have a gentle or kind childhood, and I think that's a big part of it. But the way people can choose to take their experience, however dark or traumatic or horrible the experiences are, to take those experiences and find purpose in them. And I know that's what my grandma has done with her life, and I never really thought of her inspiring me to do the same, but it's kind of exactly the same, because she says the more she shares her story, the freer she is of the nightmares, the freer she is of the heaviness. She says every time she speaks, it's like she's amazed how willing people are to take a little bit of that burden, And I feel the same way when I share my story, with other recovering addicts or people who are, contemplating changing their lives or whatever. It's every single one of my experiences were exactly what they were supposed to be, so that I could be who I am for others. And the same thing with my grandma, and she's just always had that knowing. It took me until I got clean at 46 years old to even begin to understand that. But it was like something that she always knew about her life and her story.
Which just goes back to that strength and that spirit of resilience that is just undeniable. It's there. And I think that, as you said, this is probably going to come out wrong, but I sometimes feel that being a victim is comfortable. For some people, the world has done me wrong. And she is an example of somebody who the world did horribly wrong, and still she puts it for others to heal from her experience.
So I work in treatment as well, right? And I see a lot of addicts in early recovery who are still stuck in that victim, right? If you had the childhood that I had, if you grew up where I grew up, if your dad beat you like mine beat me, if your uncle touched you like my uncle, you know what I mean? All these things, like, and with a lot of addicts, it's not comfortable, but it continues to justify the behavior, is all that is.
Yeah.
And until you choose, or until you even know that you have a choice, which I think a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
You know, to have your mind open enough to know that you have a choice. I bring my grandma to work with me every opportunity I can. And I say, gather them up, get them all, gather them up, bring them in the room. Bring your best resentment, bring your biggest resentment, and come meet my grandma. You know, and I just watch their faces change, like, you know, to see someone who has really, really, really been a victim,
Right.
but who doesn't identify as one, or doesn't act like one, or look like one, or speak like one, or move like one.
Yeah. Well, and you know the statement, hurt people, but not her.
Right.
So if she doesn't do it, maybe I shouldn't be doing it either. You know, we live through examples of others we find our inspiration.
Exactly.
So I'm going to move ahead because we're getting close on time.
Okay.
Okay, I do think it's important that we answer this one, and then I'll skip to the end because I do want to give a few moments for you guys if you have some questions. What can our younger, and I mean you touched on it just now, but specifically people who aren't necessarily in a place where they're in recovery, what do you think that your grandmother would like, perhaps the high school kids, the middle school kids that I get to work with, what's her takeaway?
I think it would be to have them understand that what might appear to be harmless is not harmless. You know, little comments, little jokes, little backhanded
Put downs?
Yeah. Are not harmless. And I think she would probably touch on social media and how much easier it is to be a bully on social media. You're an invisible bully, you know, unidentifiable really. But the type of pain, the type of harm, the type of damage that causes. And I know she talks a lot about when they were taken from their home and put in the ghetto, which happened to be directly across the street from their house. So now they're in this, you know, fenced in four-block radius ghetto, and they're watching their neighbors take their things, take their crops, take their goats, take their chickens, you know what I mean? Take everything in their house and
Take their life.
And she talks about Jewish neighbors, Christian neighbors, and how, you know, right before the Nazis came in, they were friends and they would play. And then, you know, as soon as she had to wear a yellow star, she became a dirty Jew. And the one neighbor stole, you know, everything from their house. The other neighbor risked his life in the middle of the night to call my grandpa's name, to call my great-grandpa's name, my grandma's dad's name, so he could throw a piece of bread over the fence. And I think my mom and grandma encourage people, you know, what neighbor are you? What neighbor would you be?
Yeah.
And that's a hard question. I mean, I know we'd like to all believe that we would be the good one. That's a hard, to really, really choose that is not an easy thought.
It is, and with so much at risk. I've always thought, I hope that I would do the right thing. I hope I would step forward. But I agree. I don't think you know what you will do until you are in that moment, faced with that moment. Maybe wrapping your head around it early would bring you forward, but you know, we just don't know. I'm going to move ahead because we are running out of time, but I wanted to say, first off, thank you, and bravo for sharing. Thank you for sharing and for being a part of this with me. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. There was a couple more. I'm a big question asker, but what I want to just finish with today is as we honor the lives and legacies of Gerta, Doris and of Esther. Let us carry their lessons forward. Their strength, resilience, advocacy remind us of what it means to be human, to endure, to hope, and to act with kindness. Kindness. Let their stories inspire us not just to remember, but to build a world where tolerance, understanding, thrive. Not just exist, but thrive. Thank you for joining me today in honoring these incredible women and ensuring that their legacies live on through our words and our actions. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.